morning, everyone. My name is Claude Steele. I'm the Provost of Columbia University, and it is my great pleasure this morning to welcome all of you to Columbia's World Leaders Forum. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Columbia-Paris Alliance program, that is Columbia in alliance with 3 Paris universities, l'École Polytechnique, Sciences Po, and Paris 1. And it's also sponsored by Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, and I want to thank them for their ongoing contributions to this forum. It's very important to us. We are joined this morning by the President of the European Commission, José Manuel Barroso. Mr. President, welcome. Columbia's World Leaders Forum was launched in 2003 as a university-wide initiative to support uninhibited dialogue on the most pressing economic, political, environmental, and social questions of our time, questions that with each passing year have larger and larger global dimensions. Over the past 7 years, the Forum has offered an opportunity for more than 15,000 students, faculty, and staff to directly engage important figures from 48 nations representing every corner of the globe. By allowing the university community to enter into a conversation with leaders who are grappling with major challenges on the international stage, the World Leaders Forum allows Columbia to fulfill one of its most important duties as a global center of learning. We take as an article of faith that only through a free exchange of ideas will solutions be found to the biggest problems facing the world today. President Barroso, the former Prime Minister of Portugal, today serves as the 11th President of the European Commission. President Barroso was elected to the Portuguese Parliament in 1985. In 1999, he became the President of Portugal's Social Democratic Party, a post to which he was re-elected 3 times and then became Portugal's Prime Minister in 2002. As Columbia's Provost, I am also pleased to share with you that Mr. Barroso is an accomplished academic in his own right. He has served as the head of the International Relations Department at Lusíada University in Lisbon, and he holds a law degree from the University of Lisbon and a master's degree in political science from the University of Geneva. The problems confronting Europe and the European Union are familiar and, in a word, daunting. They include climate change, trade policy, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, and most urgently, recovery from an historic global financial and economic crisis that has left no European nation untouched. There also is the combustible mix of ethnicity and accelerating migration throughout the European Union, an issue that has surfaced with great intensity in recent days and weeks with respect to Roma settlements in France. The global challenges occupy the scholarly work of many in this university community. We appreciate the extraordinary complexity of these issues and recognize that an interdisciplinary effort is essential if we are to make progress on developing effective responses. Having spent my professional life in academia, I trust that Professor Barroso's time spent at universities has served him well in this regard. But of course, there is another layer of non-significant complexity to President Barroso's work. The European Union comprises 27 member states. Among these nations, the average per capita annual income ranges from 7,000 to 78 euros. In the Eurozone, there are 23 official languages and 3 times that many minority and regional languages. The historic pressures facing Europe are providing a stern test for President Barroso and every other leader invested in preserving and strengthening the European Union. President Barroso's commitment to restoring market confidence by reducing government debt provoked disagreement from France and other member nations, as well as the United States. The financial crisis in Greece precipitated an intense dialogue with Germany. The United Kingdom's insistence on economic sovereignty remains a challenge challenging fact of life for a European Commission insistent on a coordinated response to a financial crisis. President Barroso's reply has been to echo a sentiment expressed frequently by American leaders since the founding of our nation. In Mr. Barroso's first State of the Union address delivered earlier this month, he set forth his vision for a unified and more integrated Europe by saying, quote, "We either swim together or sink separately." Please join me in welcoming to Colombia's World Leaders Forum European Commission President José Manuel Barroso.
Presidents of the World Leaders Forum and of Columbia University, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I'd like to thank the World Leaders Forum for inviting me today and for your kind words of introduction. Also, thank you for giving me this opportunity to have an open debate with so many students of this very prestigious Columbia University in New York. Following in the footsteps of so many leaders from this country and around the world, I am very happy to make Europe's voice heard today. This is my first time here at the campus of Columbia University, but I had a previous experience with Columbia University when there was immediately after my graduation in law from Lisbon University, I was participating in a program, American law program, made by Columbia University plus Leiden University and Amsterdam University of the Netherlands. And I see that this vocation of Columbia to engage with European universities like the Sorbonne, one of the most prestigious universities in Europe and indeed in the world, and other French universities, that you keep this tradition, and I really welcome that. I will try to explain how Europe is developing its global role in this post-crisis world. A former president of the United States and former president of this university, Dwight D. Eisenhower, once said that an intellectual is a man who takes more words than necessary to say more than he knows. I will try and avoid being too intellectual in this presentation, even if, as you said so kindly, I love academia and the academia setting to discuss freely all kinds of ideas. Let me start by giving you some basic facts about the European Union, which illustrate the enormous changes it has gone through since its birth back in 1957. The European Union, then called European Community, started with just 6 member states, but it is now composed of 27 countries, stretching from the Atlantic to the Black Sea, from the Mediterranean to the Arctic. It is one of the most highly developed regions in the world, with a population of more than 500 million. It is a single dynamic market. It is what we call in our treaty a social market economy, from which certain very big countries, I would say, seem to be drawing inspiration. It has a single currency, the euro, which in just a few years has become the second currency in the world. It is the leading trading and exporting power in the world and the second largest source of foreign direct investment. It is an increasingly committed player in peace and security. It is the world's #1 donor of development aid. The Union is also an active political player with regional and global security interests and responsibilities. In the last 10 years, the European Union has launched and carried out more than 23 military and civilian missions worldwide. This European Union is a natural and strong partner for the United States. Together, we account for about 12% of the world population, but over 50% of world GDP. We are also economically interdependent. Our economic relationship is by far the largest between any 2 trading blocs in history. Our bilateral trading partnership generates 33% of world trade in goods and 45% of world trade in services. These figures alone will be enough to make the European Union a central partner of the United States. However, our relation goes far beyond trade and is much deeper than economic statistics. We share a powerful common bond, the same foundational values of liberty and democracy, and a long relationship built on friendship and trust. We also share common strategic and political interests. I think we can safely say that no other partnership is so intense and rich as the transatlantic one. This very important relationship between the European Union and the United States must be seen in the context of unprecedented global interdependence. The economic and financial crisis brought this phenomenon into focus with a sharpness never seen before. This interdependence is combined with a shift in power from what some call the Old West to both East and South, with new powers emerging, like China, India, Brazil, and others. A new worldwide governance system is being put in place against this background. The whole world has to come up with new, effective answers to worldwide imbalances and other factors generating insecurity. No country, no matter how powerful it may be, not even the United States, is able to tackle the challenges of the 21st century on its own. We either stand together and prosper or we fall separately. This is a fact of life in the 21st century. From global security to economic growth and trade, from energy security to climate protection, a convincing global response is ultimately impossible without active cooperation between Europe and the United States. In today's world, where the tectonic plates of geopolitics and geoeconomics are shifting, Europe is the United States' indispensable partner for building a multilateral world that integrates emerging powers. First, the European Union has the political culture to play this role. Second, it now has the institutional setup to achieve this ambition. Third, the current economic crisis has given Europe renewed political will both to strengthen its internal coordination and to play its part in the world scene. The European Union, as you know, is neither a federal state nor a traditional intergovernmental organization. It is a union of states that have freely decided to share parts of their sovereignty to solve common problems through common policies. In some areas, integrated policies. In some other areas, coordination of national policies. Europe is itself a test bed for globalization. Its political culture makes it particularly able to adapt to a multipolar and globalized context. Because of the very nature of our political setup, with 27 member states, we Europeans experience every day how to share political leadership. We have what I call a culture of dynamic compromise that has proved pretty successful over the years. Above all, we have a positive-sum vision of politics, not a zero-sum view. Multilateralism is therefore in our DNA, and this is precisely the political added value that Europe can bring to the new emerging world order. We also now have additional means of action that give the European Union new opportunities to play its role in global affairs. Our new rules of procedure, the Lisbon Treaty, entered into force in December 2009. This treaty gives us ways to act more efficiently inside Europe and means to defend Europe's interests on the world stage. This institutional development is the political translation of broader changes. The European Union's position on the international stage has changed dramatically in recent years. We are now progressively speaking with one voice across a range of areas, from global economic governance to trade and crisis response, from climate change to energy. These enhanced means of action are particularly welcome at a time when Europe and the world are facing this unprecedented challenge of the economic and financial crisis. This brings me to my third point. The current economic crisis has given the European Union a sense of urgency and a renewed political will to reinforce European unity and to take on global responsibilities. The history of European integration shows, time and again, that when a crisis hits, we stick closer together and we come out stronger, just as I believe Europe will come out of the current crisis stronger. This phase of the crisis was the biggest stress test that Europe has faced for many decades, and we are passing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just told you how Europe has renovated itself to remain a central player, a reference player indeed, on the world stage. I have argued for a strong transatlantic agenda as one of the pillars of global governance. Now I would like to turn to the issues where we can make progress together and where the rest of the world expects us also to deliver. The first one is to ensure a strong, stable, sustainable recovery of the world economy, based on mutually beneficial growth. The economic outlook, even if there are some doubts still and some uncertainties, is improving. Growth will be higher than forecast this year, and unemployment in Europe has stopped increasing. But nothing will be more dangerous than a return to business as usual. The crisis is not over yet. Restoring growth and creating jobs is now the #1 priority of the European Union, and I believe also in the United States, as it is for our G20 partners from other parts of the world. Europe and the United States were the two founding fathers, if I may use the expression, of the G20, mainly as a way to weather the economic and financial crisis. Now, the G20 has turned into the premier forum for international economic cooperation, and both Europe and the US have to be at the forefront of its agenda. The second area that has huge mutually beneficial potential is trade. Trade is one of the keys to growth and jobs. Trade is an area where we can boost growth without an impact on deficits and debt. This is a taxpayer-friendly policy. In October, the European Commission will present a renewed trade policy for Europe. We want to harness closer trade relations with the most dynamic regions of the world. We'll open up more markets for Europe and more job opportunities by concluding new free trade agreements with all corners of the globe, like South Korea. We have just concluded that agreement, but also Singapore, Mercosur, many others. Europe remains open to the world and will continue to promote open trade. We will not change our stance because of the current crisis, but we are saying loud and clear that development of trade needs to be balanced. The figures for bilateral trade between the European Union and the United States are quite impressive, at 610 billion euros last year, but they are still way below what they could be. I see ample margin to enhance further our mutual interest on regulatory convergence and on non-tariff barriers. I see huge potential in developing a transatlantic agenda for growth and jobs. We also need a new global engagement. Conclusion of the Doha Development Round would provide a stimulus to the world's economies. An ambitious Doha agreement is within reach if there is a political will and a strategic vision. We must seize this opportunity. Those negotiations are too important to fail. Europe is fully committed to this process. Climate change is, of course, another very important issue on which we need to work together in order to secure an international, legally binding agreement. Let me be clear, the Copenhagen conference did not meet all Europe's expectations, but it was an important step forward. We need to press ahead. The climate change problem is still there. Now the focus has turned to Cancun. We need to make progress there in the form of a series of action-oriented decisions which will pave the way for the post-2012 international framework. Of course, such a package has to be balanced. It must reflect the interests and concerns of developed and developing countries alike. The European Union on its side remains committed to this agenda and is continuing to provide leadership. Our climate legislation for 2020 is already in place. We are putting into action our ambitious target for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. And we remain ready to move to 30% provided we see commitments from other developed countries, including the United States, and adequate action from developing countries, especially from the big emerging economies. The European Union member states have also committed to make available 7.2 billion euros of fast start funding between 2010 and 2012. They will keep their promise. Timing is running out, and it is clear that we need to change gear now. The European Union and the United States also have a leading role to play in giving new impetus to the Millennium Development Goals. This is what I did on behalf of the European Union yesterday evening at the UN high-level meeting on the MDGs. The final countdown has begun on the 2015 deadline. The international community still has a long way to go before the Millennium Goals are reached, no one should use the economic crisis as an excuse to postpone this crucial ethical commitment. The European Union provides 58% of development aid worldwide. This added up to $63 billion in 2009. Yesterday, the European Union demonstrated its commitment to stand side by side with developing countries by offering up to €1 billion to the most committed and vulnerable African, Caribbean and Pacific countries to support their efforts to achieve the MDGs. Achieving the MDGs is not just an option. It is not a luxury. It is both an obligation and an investment. The world cannot thrive on imbalances. We need a spirit of partnership with developing countries taking ownership of the Millennium Goals and also responsibility for management of resources, and developed countries showing accountability for their promises. This is the price we have to pay in order to get results for everyone. Lastly, safeguarding global security at large has also become a task we must share. The European Union is not shirking this responsibility. It is becoming increasingly active and being recognized as effective in its role as a spreader of peace and security in the world. We are taking part in crisis management operations in 4 continents, from Georgia to Kosovo, from Afghanistan to a number of African countries. We are engaging globally. Our approach to security is a comprehensive one, which includes development, reconstruction, and humanitarian aid. In the humanitarian field, we are a leading player in the world, providing assistance to 18 million people every year, including now in Pakistan. Europe, with its unique display of smart power, is an irreplaceable ally of the United States in securing peace and stability throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. Europe is indeed a global player pursuing a political vision inspired by its values of freedom, justice and solidarity, and by a spirit of partnership. I want to underline this point about values, because the European Union is more than a common market. It was established as a way of economic integration, yes, but for political goals, above all for peace, because the European Union was born after the Second World War, having in mind the reconciliation of all peoples of Europe. So it has a very strong political dimension with a very strong attachment to very important values. I believe these same values are also in the fabric of the United States society and system. The ties that bind us are second to none. Together, we can achieve what we will not be able to achieve alone. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm Merit Jano, a professor here at SIPA and the law school, and my specialty is international trade, so I was very pleased to hear you make those references. I have the honor of asking the first question and moderating the questions with our audience. And if I may, Mr. President, could I invite you to say a bit more about what you see as the best vision of an integrated cooperation between the United States and Europe? And particularly, you mentioned trade and regulatory issues. Do you think we have a common vision, and how do we achieve that?
I think in both societies there is that understanding. In fact, there are several fora where these matters are decided, and there are consultations going on. And if you ask the business community in Europe and the United States, they are very much in favor of more integration, including through regulatory convergence. And in fact, some years ago, we have created with the United States the Transatlantic Economic Council, where the European Union is represented by the Commission and the United States is represented by the White House. And one of the goals is precisely to promote this kind of regulatory convergence, eliminate some obstacles, sometimes non-tariff obstacles that exist to trade. And I think we should make this a priority, because there is still a huge potential economically on both sides of the Atlantic for more activity in terms of trade, in terms of investment. And this is a message that, of course, the European Union will bring to the next summit, United States-European Union summit, that will take place in Lisbon, the 20th of November.
Thank you very much. With those with questions, could please come to the microphones. And I see we have someone here already. Excuse me, if you wouldn't mind going to the mic. Well, if we could ask you to start us off, and then followed by Professor Greenberg.
So the U.S. has done a lot of research into what their part was in the economic crisis, for instance, individual debt and the housing bubble. I'm curious what Europe has found have been some of their factors that played into the economic crisis, and what Europe has decided to do to prevent those from happening again in the future.
Oh my God, that's a very big question. We believe that the causes of the crisis were major imbalances, including what happened in the financial market, some kind of erratic behavior, and we have seen this here in the United States, but also in Europe. And because of the globalization, that had, of course, a very much stronger global impact than before. So in a way, this crisis is unprecedented by its global nature. So this was the origin or the deep cause. Lehman Brothers was, of course, the demonstration, the trigger, but the causes of the crisis were much deeper. It has to do also with very high levels of debt. That's why we are now addressing this issue at European level and with the G20 as well. As you probably know, I mean, it was our initiative together with the Americans that we decided to set up this kind of process at leaders level of the G20 to have a more cooperative approach globally to the answers that we have to find, including some kind of regulation and in terms of financial markets. Internally in Europe, stronger economic governance, namely in the euro area, because in the euro area there are some disparities among its members. And also, I've mentioned it before, for instance, to resist protectionism. That was an important point. The G20 gave a clear signal that we should not come back, as it happened in the crisis of the 30s, to some kind of full protection. It was avoided. There is what some people call low-intensity protection, but the reality is that in face of this crisis there was not a coming back to full naked protectionism and some other measures. So initially we believe it was important also to avoid the most recessionary effects. We have adopted some stimulus programs. Now we believe it's time to exit, as we say in our language, so to have fiscal consolidation and economic reform. In Europe, our policy today is one of linking fiscal consolidation, because we cannot live with the very high levels of debt that we have in some of our members, even if Europe globally, the euro area globally, has a lower level debt than the United States or Japan, but there are differences among the member states. So we are addressing the problem of debt, and we are at the same time promoting structural reforms, so to increase Europe's competitiveness and to create new sources of growth. Growth, of course, is the answer, but we have to make some reforms to achieve this kind of growth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over here, please.
Mr. Barroso, you yourself said earlier that the EU has experienced many very drastic changes in recent years, changes that have in fact led to a more integrated and stronger European Union. So my question is, to what extent would you like the EU to centralize power in Europe and to strengthen, and how much of their sovereignty do member states have to relinquish to meet the ambitions of the EU?
That's an old debate. I don't like the idea of centralizing power, and I've always avoided this kind of concept. What I believe we should do is to implement what we call in our jargon the principle of subsidiarity. We have to see at which level we take decisions. Sometimes it's at European level, sometimes at national level, some other times it's at sub-national level. One thing is sure, in the age of globalization, many of those issues are best addressed at European level than at national level in Europe. For instance, even the biggest member states of the European Union, if they want to count globally, if they want to discuss in a, let's say, good position with our American friends or with other partners like Russia or China or India, they can count much more if they do it through a European Union of 500 million people that is, for instance, #1 trade actor in the world. So it's a question of value added. We have to see in each matter where there is some value added. But the European Union is a union, I've said it in my introductory remarks, a union of states and citizens. The states will remain. In the foreseeable future, the states will remain in Europe. Some of them are very, very old nations that, of course, will not accept to be deprived of their sovereignty. What we have is an original model of sharing or pooling sovereignty. Member states keep their sovereignty, but they share some of those competences. And that's, I think, the good approach to it, not to build the European Union against our nation states, but to decide, depending on the issue, what is the appropriate level of integration. In some areas, integration. In some areas, cooperation. The new treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, in fact, gives very important steps in the sense of integration because many more areas are now subject to votes by qualified majority instead of unanimity. So we are, in fact, pooling, I believe, in a more efficient way, but also more democratic way, because the European Parliament is directly elected and we are accountable to the European Parliament. We are, in fact, sharing more our sovereignty.
Thank you very much. Over here, please.
Hi, good morning, sir. Thank you for your talk this morning. I have two questions for you today.
One, please. Could I invite you to have one question, please?
Oh, okay. To what extent do you think that the lack of constructive CAP reform is an impediment to the EU taking on a global leadership role, considering that it already takes up 48% of the EU budget as it is today?
No, I don't agree with the point behind your question. I think the CAP reform has been taking place progressively. It's one of the integrated policies of the European Union. And of course, when you say this, that it takes all this part of the budget, you should not forget that it's a completely integrated policy. But so that money is spent by the European community budget, but the member states, they do not spend that money. In other areas, for instance, research, there are some parts that are spent by the European community budget, but the member states, they keep their investment. So in fact, we are doing our reform of the common agricultural policy. Some issues related to agriculture, for instance, food safety, are becoming global and should also be addressed. So I don't see, as your question suggests, a direct link between the CAP weight in the budget and the role of the European Union worldwide. Of course, it's a matter for debate, and there are different views. We are going to present some proposals now for the next financial perspectives regarding the CAP. Should we or not give it a lower part in the overall distribution of resources, but I will not make that association to the global role of the European Union. On the contrary, the issue of global food security is increasingly an issue that deserves also global leadership.
Thank you very much. May I invite one of our distinguished faculty I've made stand in line to ask the next question.
My name is Jack Greenberg. I'm a professor in the law school. 3 years ago, the European Court of Human Rights decided that the Czech Republic has been violating the European Convention on Human Rights by segregating Roma children throughout the country. Since then, it has decided that Greece and Croatia also are segregating Roma children in violation of the Convention. The Convention provides that those whose human rights are violated are entitled to a swift and effective remedy. Yet the segregation continues, and the violators have done nothing but hold meetings and conferences. Roma rights advocates have said that the law is a paper tiger. Why has not the European Commission required the Czech Republic and other violators to comply with the decisions of the European Court, or are Roma rights advocates correct?
First of all, Mr. Professor, as you probably know, the European Court of Human Rights is not part of the European Union. So it's a different institutional setup. In the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, belongs to the Council. It's part of the Council of Europe, where we have countries that are not part of the European Union. Russia, for instance, is member of the Council of Europe, but is not member of the European Union. So it's a different institutional setup. Our obligations are in the respect of our treaties, and we are fulfilling our obligations. So whenever there is a complaint made to the European Commission, we act. In fact, we are now discussing some issues, as you probably know, related to Roma and to the principle of non-discrimination. We are making legal analysis of the cases. And one thing I can tell you is that in Europe, the principle of non-discrimination is very, very strong. And the European Commission and, of course, the European Court of Justice, this is the court that is part of the European Union, has a good record on this. And I'm sure it will act if we find any case of discrimination. But we should not forget one thing. The European Union is a union of 27 countries. All of them are supposed, and I'm sure they are, countries where there is a rule of law. So there is always the possibility for any offended person to go to the national courts. And there is a system of appeals that can come, of course, to the European Court of Justice. But we are a union of member states that respect the law, and if there is any complaint, any person can go for the tribunal, for the court, and that is happening. And there are some cases where the courts have been, in fact, national courts have taken position against our member states as well in terms of violation of the principles of non-discrimination. But it's a very important and complex issue that has to be seen case by case. And I believe we should try to avoid the over-politicization of these cases.
Thank you very much. May I invite over here, please?
Thank you. Mr. President, I'm German and European citizen, so my question is with regard to the increasing importance of the EU Commission, and that we as a citizens never got the chance to directly vote for actually the EU Commission. So do you see the need going forward, maybe in 5 to 10 years, that EU citizens will get the chance to directly vote, or at least vote for the EU Parliament, and then the Parliament will directly vote for the President?
Look, first of all, let me make a statement of interest. I have been elected all my life. I was elected first time to my parliament in my country when I was 29 years old. I was leader of the opposition before becoming prime minister, and then I became president of the Commission. So I want to make this clear because sometimes there are some stereotypes. Say that European Commission are unelected bureaucrats or technocrats. Most of my colleagues in the European Commission are politicians, some of them with former prime ministers that have been elected in their own country, myself. Now, what happens? In Europe, because we have 27 countries, we are not yet, I don't know if we are going to be one day, but we are not integrated polity. We are not the United States of America. It's a different system. We have 27 countries, so we have a representative democracy. The European Parliament is directly elected. It's important to know this. The European Parliament is directly elected. But afterwards, the President of the Commission is also elected by the European Parliament. I was elected after a secret vote. So I have a democratic legitimacy. But of course, it was proposed by the European Council. So it's a kind of a representative legitimacy, indirect election. I don't foresee in the, let's say, immediate future any possibility to change it, because we just had the Lisbon Treaty. This is a matter of the treaty, cannot be changed by normal legislation. And so there is not now in the European Union member states a great appetite for a new comprehensive reform of the institutions. But if you ask my opinion, I personally will be in favor of a stronger legitimacy for the President of the Commission. But I want to make it clear that today already there is an indirect but election of the Commission President. By the way, in some member states in Europe, you can be Prime Minister without being elected. There are several cases. Because what the citizens elect directly the Parliament, but afterwards, the Parliament can, in some cases, designate a Prime Minister that has not been elected. So, in fact, it's a kind of representative democracy that, of course, is more difficult in Europe because we are 27 member states and not just one country. But there have been recently, in some of our biggest democracies in Europe, Prime Ministers that have not been directly elected, but their parties had the majority in the Parliament.
Thank you very much. Further question over here, please.
Hello, my name is Ayala Haran, and I'm a student in the School of International Public Affairs. Mr. President, my question to you is about the Greek crisis. Following the Greek crisis, some of the critique that came about was that a single monetary policy cannot be sustained without harmonized fiscal policy across the European states. I was wondering what your view is about harmonizing or coordinating fiscal policies across nations that vary so much in GDP per capita.
Yes, we should do it. And we are in favor of, as much as possible, fiscal convergence of the fiscal policy. And in fact, we have the European Monetary Union, the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. What happened was that not always those rules were respected. And some of the member states were violating the rules. They were going beyond what they should have done in terms of deficits of the budget and also in terms of debt ratio. What we are doing now is precisely to strengthen those rules in terms of enforcement and surveillance mechanisms. I personally believe that this is the good solution for the future, to have a much stricter control of the way the member states implement their national policies. And this is allowed by the treaty. The current treaty, our rules, allow, in fact, the European Union to take these steps, because it's now considered by the treaty that was signed and approved and ratified by all member states that national economic policy is not just a matter for national interest, but of common interest. So we have the legal grounds, and now I would say the political will in Europe to strengthen the rules of the monetary union so that we can have a economic union. Of course, taking consideration the situation is not the same, but also look, an integrated country like the United States, a federal state, but one country like the United States, in fact, there are different situations also and different fiscal positions in some of the states. So we are not at that level of integration, but we are indeed promoting stronger governance for the euro area and in principle also for all the European Union.
Thank you very much. Over here, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Arvind Amadi. I'm a freshman at Columbia College. In your speech, you touched on Europe's 2020 by 2020 plan, which I certainly admire for its ambition. However, last week, a front-page New York Times article painted us a picture of a small town in Hungary that is expected to struggle with the loss of its coal subsidies. My question is this: how does the European Union plan to assist these localities that have become almost dependent upon energy practices that are not sustainable?
That's a very good question, and precisely it shows how difficult and challenging is our objective. And we are doing it, and Hungary, by the way, is doing a big effort to achieve those goals. What we can do is to have some cases, as we have, support for those regions. We have structural funds. The European Union has given over the years huge amounts of money to the less developed regions of the European Union, and in fact that is a way to compensate for some of the restructuring they have to do so that they can have progressively cleaner ways of producing energy.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Mr. President, earlier this summer, an international court found that Kosovo's declaration of independence did not violate international law. Afterwards, Serbian President Boris Tadic stated that he would only recognize Serbia's territorial sovereignty and would not recognize Kosovo's independence. Where does that now put Serbia's ascension into the European Union?
Look, very recently there were very good developments in this issue. In fact, we very much welcomed the more constructive position taken recently by Serbia. And there was, in fact, the European Union mediation. Cathy Ashton, the High Representative of the European Union and Vice President of the Commission, she played a role on this. Of course, we know there are different positions from Serbia and Kosovo regarding, of course, the independence of Kosovo, but they have agreed now to have some kind of dialogue. And we are working with both partners, Serbia and Kosovo. I think both, they share one aim, is to become one day members of the European Union. And so I think this is good news for those who want to have a stable Balkans, where Serbia has, of course, an extremely important role to play.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Mr. President, as a Turkish citizen, I would like to ask you, what do you think is the reason behind the fact that Turkey has not been admitted into EU during the past 25 years, while other states were admitted which had similar amount of wealth, similar population, and similar or same political and regional issues as Turkey?
Look, first of all, we are in a process of negotiations with Turkey, but it's agreed And Turkey recognizes this, that not all the benchmarks have been met. This is the first issue. We are, and the European Commission is very much in favor of the enlargement of the European Union, but we have to see if all the members meet all the criteria. Just recently there was a referendum, as you know, in your country, where in fact some adaptations were made to fulfill also some of those benchmarks in terms of separation of military, civilian power and some others, even if I know it's an extremely controversial issue also inside Turkey. Now, apart from that, and I want to be completely honest with you, apart from that, there are, it's true, today in the European Union member states, in some sector of the public opinion, some big questions about the membership of Turkey, because also of cultural differences, and that is something that is extremely serious. And we are now discussing this matter with our own member states and with the Turkish authorities. In fact, today I think I will meet the President of Turkey here in New York. So, and this is an important issue because there have been some developments, both in the public opinion in Turkey and in some of our member states, that is making it more difficult, the progress of the Turkish membership. Apart from this, there is also the unresolved issue of Cyprus. And this makes the point that sometimes the Cyprus is blocking progress in some of negotiations, because the Republic of Cyprus is blocking because of the situation of the division still of the island. So there are different issues that make the process of Turkey very difficult and challenging. Having said this, in the past we have solved situations at least as challenging as this one, and I personally believe that there is great possibility for progress in the relations between Turkey and the European Union.
Thank you. Over here, please.
My name is Ethan Wilkes. I'm a student of the School of International and Public Affairs. Mr. President, you mentioned Europe is neither a unitary state or a typical intergovernmental organization, but rather pioneering a unique political experiment. What do you believe we here in North America and other regions of the world might be able to glean from the successes and failures of the European experiment in managing relationships with our own neighbors?
It's a very long and important question you are telling me. First of all, let me tell you, we don't pretend to give lessons to nobody. One of the things that I think we should learn in Europe, as in the world, is that there should be no room for arrogance. We all have mistakes in our past, and we should learn with all those mistakes. But at the same time, we sincerely believe that extreme nationalism, or even nationalism, is bad. There is a great French author who said once, I'm going to say it in French, but I can't translate it if you don't know. Le patriotisme, c'est l'amour des siens, le nationalisme, c'est la haine des autres. It means patriotism is love for what is ours, nationalism is the hate of others. And I think this lesson is not just for Europe, it's for the world. We can be a patriot, we can be a Portuguese, a French, a German, American, a Chinese, love our countries, but at the same time have an idea for mankind, for the others. And this lesson is important in the European Union because we had the Second World War, we had the Shoah in the 20th century in Europe, and I think that lesson was basically learned. That is why we are sharing sovereignty. We don't have an idea of the sovereignty as the absolute power, the national interest as everything. The national interest, of course, is very, very important, but we should also look to other interests of others and to try to have as much as possible a cooperative approach globally. Idealism, I don't think it is idealism. I think very often the cynics are wrong. And we can go in that direction. This is, I think, the good lesson. By the way, recently disappeared, I think he was professor in this university, Tony Judd. Tony Judd. He died recently. And he was a man who wrote some of the most beautiful pages regarding European history, namely after the war, the post-war history. And this was one of the lessons, that Europe is well placed to have a kind of a post-absolute sovereignty of the states. And I think this approach is important for Europe, of course, but also for the Americas, for Asia. if not, we will have more wars, as it was the case in our history in Europe and elsewhere.
Thank you very much. Over here, please.
Good morning, Mr. President. As you mentioned in your speech, despite diversities, all European countries share something more than a common currency, such as values. Now, in a scenario in which, in some countries, such as mine, Italy, political parties promoting separation and very narrow-minded idea, and they're growing, how do you think there will ever be a day in which future generation will think of themselves such as European rather than Italian, French, German? And if so, how far is the day in the future to come?
Look, of course, our societies are not perfect, and there will be problems with or without European Union. Let's put things in perspective. I'm not having a utopian idea of the European Union. In fact, I believe utopias usually are the source of totalitarianism. And I personally do not like the ideas of utopias, because usually it is with some utopic ideas that we have built. I mean, mankind has built during many years some of the worst cases in terms of political regime. Now, what I really believe, and I had that experience, my country was not democracy until 74, 76, is that today in Europe, in Italy for instance, you have mentioned Italy, your country, people can be citizens of their country and citizens of Europe. So all those, let's say, acquis, everything that was in terms of freedom of circulation, in terms of integrating the markets, in terms of reducing nationalism, this was a positive development from an economic point of view, that's for sure. If you look at the evolution of Europe after the Second World War, it's amazing. But also in terms of cultural and human development. So I think this is an important point. And this makes it easier. My sons now, they are, for instance, they see the way we see Spain and Portugal that were completely close to each other is completely different for this generation that it was for the generation before. And now you can travel all over Europe without passport. I think this is a progress in terms of the civilization, if you want to use that word. But that does not mean that we don't have sometimes problems, and we have seen recently some problems, sometimes problems also related to this. But if you think historically, if you put things in perspective, I think la tendance lourde, let's say the overall trend is, I believe, one of progress, and this is what I welcome. And your country, I mean, I'm suspect. I love Italy. Italy is the mother of our Western civilization. Look, this is inspired. All this architecture from Palladio, this comes from Italy. And so without being Italian nationalist, I cannot be. I mean, I think Italy has some problems, but what a great country Italy is.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time for questions. We have many more. But with that, let me hand it back to you as appreciation for giving us such time today, if you'd like to make some closing remarks.
Oh, closing remarks, thank you. I think this is the last one, probably allows me to make that remark. It's about culture. You have seen here, this is inspiration from classic culture, from Greece and Rome, in fact. And I think this is something extremely important. Today I spoke about economy and security, but we should not forget culture. And we are here in one of the most prestigious universities of the United States, and I think I can say also of the world. And I believe this kind of dialogue, based on values, making the understanding between different cultures, but also underlining what is common, is more important than ever. I believe the globalization can be a great thing for us in Europe, and I would say also in the United States. In some cases, people are reacting defensively. They are thinking about losing some privileges. The West is declining. Europe is declining. We call that la déclinologie, the theory or the doctrine of decline. It's only natural that others emerge, and this is not necessarily bad. It's only natural that China, the biggest country in the world in terms of population, wants a more important role globally, and it's good when we see hundreds of millions of people getting out of poverty. The question is if you are able, with these new challenges, to build a fairer world that is more just. I believe the European Union has these resources. We have learned hard experience through our history. I think the United States and Europe are well placed to promote this kind of co-leadership without arrogance, as I said. Probably we should not have the ideas as the past to impose. We cannot impose our solutions, but we can propose them. And those solutions are around human values of freedom and democracy and justice. And I believe that it is possible, and the European Union is a good partner for that. That is my last message. Thank you very much for receiving me here in your university.